So people who have those experiences, I want to partner with them because I don't have those experiences and we kind of wear our respective hats where we have more experience. I'll wear 50 of them. The other guy will wear the other 50 and we'll wear which ones that, we have expertise in. I also like touring buildings and seeing how the US GDP works, how the world really works. I mean, how everything we own, from this shirt to my coffee mug, the coffee I'm drinking, has been through a warehouse. And actually, honestly, numerous warehouses on the supply chain. And that's why you don't see a bunch of people say, okay, I'm going to get into industrial syndication investments, because you have to almost have a background in it to go into it, to understand it. It's really sitting down and utilizing your network to expand, to find the right person, because you don't know if you're getting the A team or the C team on the brokerage, and you might get totally different data from each one of them. And that might steer your whole investment. So like if you're talking about Amazon, it's only 6% of their budget, that rent and operating expenses. The rest of it usually is transportation and employees. So they care very little about how much they actually pay in rent, like in Amazon, because it's such a small amount.
Gregg, welcome to Real Estate Development Land to Legacy. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Gregg, so tell me a little bit about what you do.
I'm a co-sponsor on development deals as well as stabilized. We're focused on the industrial space. I come from the principal world, having worked at several large institutions during my career. Wanted to go out on my own. Initially started with the focus of trying to buy stabilized industrial assets, but quickly found that the returns and the juice is in the development. Adding value to land was something more interesting than buying something existing. So, and as well as the returns, right, with the risk. So, that's kind of where we're landed today, is we're doing, call it value add or ground up development as opposed to stable deal, which is where we're chasing, calling it all across the country, but mostly focused on the Midwest. That's where my connections are. And that's where my main focus has been as of late as well.
Cool. So you said something that caught my attention. You're a co-sponsor on deals. What does that mean?
So as opposed to, we are going and looking at sites individually ourselves and making offers on individual land sites ourselves on a daily basis. The way that we kind of decided to increase our deal flow as well as cover more markets and was to say, hey, I went out to my networks, because having worked on the institutional side, I dealt with capital markets brokers at the largest industrial, for real estate brokerage firms like CB or JLL, the teams across different multiple markets that I used to cover acquisitions for a public REIT. And so I went out to them and said, hey, are there sponsors out there looking for capital? We're looking for more deals to place capital into and be a partner on your developments. As opposed to taking an LP position, we'll sit as a co-GP, assist on asset management, leasing, disposition, as well as raising capital and investor relations. Because really my background on the real estate side, when working out in California, I worked for Link Logistics, which is the second largest owner of industrial in the country behind Prologis. And there I did leasing, did a numerous amount of transactions in my time there, and then flipped over to the acquisition side when I moved back to Ohio. So really kind of run the gambit of actually operating the asset on different sides of it. So partnering with developers who have specific experience in construction, rezoning and entitlements and abatements in Ohio are very common as well on industrial. So people who have those experiences, I want to partner with them because I don't have those experiences, and we kind of wear our respective hats where we have more experience.
Okay, so that's cool. So basically, you're the type of person that I would be looking at when I'm developing new projects, because my expertise is actually going through the process, running the development team, putting together the architects and engineers and contractors, and actually going through the construction management, the construction cycle. What I'm typically struggling with, and folks like me typically struggling with, is finding the capital and bringing all the capital to the table. So are you the guy that I need to talk to?
Yeah, so we're specifically, that's how we operate. So there's a lot of developers I operate mainly in the Midwest, as I said, and there's a lot of developers out there that want to focus on the nuts and bolts of the project, the actual construction. in tilting up the walls and getting everything done, right? They don't want to focus on the capital side. They want to focus on project management of the construction, the design, building, all of the stuff that goes into it, any rezoning that might be necessary, setbacks, any of this site plan approval, entitlements, abatements, like that is what I leave to other people. And there are a lot of people that are much better at that than I. I will say, however, we do look at our own land sites that we look at doing this for ourselves as well, because I have numerous amount of different design builder construction companies as well, helping and looking sourcing sites. But we are also, for the most part, if we're looking at a land site today, we will also look to bring in a sponsor or another sponsor with us who has that experience. So I don't have to increase our staff as well on that side, and that has better expertise than I. And we're willing to share a piece of the pie because then we can do more deals than if I'm focused on wearing all 100 hats. I'll wear 50 of them. The other guy will wear the other 50, and we'll wear which ones that, we have expertise in.
Makes sense. And so it sounds like you ended up with industrial space almost by chance, or was there a process of how you arrived? Why that specific niche?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I graduated college, I ended up working at a publicly traded REIT that specialized in retail shopping centers. And that was when Amazon was acquiring Whole Foods, and everybody thought retail was kind of dying because Amazon was going to take over the world much faster than it has actually played out. So basically, there was a rotation in power. These were power centers, so they were going through a struggle period. During the time that I was there, they had massive layoffs. And of course, me being newly out of college, they offered me a full-time role because I was in a rotational program. And they were like, well, you can move from Ohio to downtown Chicago and make $5,000 more plus a bonus. And I was like, interesting. So I just got my pay cut massively because it's more than double to live in Chicago than it was in Ohio at the time.
Right.
So from shopping centers, then I went on to work in multifamily for a very short stint at a firm that now is relatively large, has 4 billion in assets under management out of Columbus here. I did asset management there for about a year before my wife took a role to move us out to California. And this is kind of how I ended up in industrial. So when I moved out to California, I applied to a bunch of roles. One of them happened to be one of the most well-funded startups possible, which was Blackstone's Link Logistics. They decided to get back into industrial after they had exited, call it 2015. And then they decided to get back in and start a new portfolio company, call it 2018. So I was employee number 18 there. At the time, they had 80 million square feet owned. By the time I left, they had 550 million square feet owned. So massive growth. And that's how I really got the taste and the flavor for the industrial side, and really found that I liked, as opposed to multifamily, at the time I was doing mostly leasing negotiations on the industrial side. What I liked is business to business. I also like touring buildings and seeing how the US GDP works, how the world really works. I mean, how everything we own, from this shirt to my coffee mug, the coffee I'm drinking, has been through a warehouse, and actually, honestly, numerous warehouses on the supply chain. So I really enjoyed that piece of it, like the business to business negotiations, and then also seeing the business and the operations that we're running through there, and through imitation crab meat, numerous Amazon facilities, FedEx, UPS. And I found that all very interesting to see how those distribution facilities worked. And so that's why I kind of stayed in that. When I transitioned back to Ohio during COVID, because my wife and I wanted to get back, we had our first child out there. We were living in a small apartment. We were kind of in a lockdown, and we had a little baby, and we're like, this is not the same California that we moved out to. That was all surfing and golfing and tons of fun. So we moved back to Ohio, took an acquisitions role at Stag Industrial, which has about 100 million square feet, a little bit more, and is a publicly traded REIT on the industrial side. And so that role, it was more of an acquisitions role. But as most people that would be listening to a real estate show, 2022 was kind of a slowdown in acquisitions, and it kind of really has been ever since, more or less. So back in June, we decided to part ways with Stag, and just because they were set up to do more transactions, and there was no need for me at that time because they're still slow to this day on the acquisitions front. So I'm really full steam ahead on my own firm, partnered with my brother, but we really wanted to stay on the industrial front because that's where my expertise lied and my background lies.
Makes sense. Makes sense. That's a great story, how it all sort of worked out full circle almost, right? And you coming back home. So tell me a little bit about the industrial warehouse business. What does it take to get a project together? Just build it on spec and then hope that you can lease it out? Or do you first find a tenant, like an anchor tenant, and then build it for them? What's the process for new development of this product?
I can tell you it can really be any of what you just mentioned. So a lot of builders out there build stuff on spec. You don't really typically see a ton of build on like an anchor tenant like you would with retail. Let's say you're building in a 100,000 square foot building. A lot of times there's a lot of that spec build. I will tell you, build to suits are also more common, especially today as a percentage of your development in industrial right now. Honestly, build to suits make up a large chunk of the pipeline. Now that goes down when times are good and interest rates are low. So for a while, spec building throughout the country was more common than build to suits. Today, I would tell you build to suits I haven't looked at most recent stats, but may even eclipse spec right now. Where I kind of sit today is we're focused on the smaller industrial buildings. We're focused on buildings 100,000 square feet and smaller, or even if they are 200,000 square feet, we're talking about servicing businesses that need like 50,000 square feet in suites and less. So we're talking about buildings that we're chopping up into 4 or 5 tenants, as opposed to doing bulk distribution buildings, call it 300,000 to a million square foot buildings leased to a single tenant. So really, and I will tell you, we're also looking at build to suit projects because a couple of the development partners I work with do design buildings for owner users that have indicated they don't necessarily want to own. So that return profile obviously looks a lot different because you don't have to worry about downtime and spec lease up time. So upon completion, you turn over the keys and the rent commences. So you're really looking at only a 12 months to build and no vacancy risk in those scenarios. However, people find them very lucrative. So you can still do an opportunistic flip out of those at a pretty high rate of return for your investment because the cash flows are there for the family office or the ultra high net worth that wants to roll 1031 money into that, or even your Blackstones of the world, your Prologes of the world that have a dividend that they have to hit.
Interesting. So I'm just wondering, I recently had a conversation with a property owner, which is our niche. We partner with property owners to help them develop their sites, and they have a number of properties along the railroad down in Oregon, and it's mostly suited for some sort of an industrial use. And so we're talking about it, and I'm like, honestly, I don't even know where to start with that. I mean, it's obviously easy to build. We primarily build multifamily residential. So for me, to build a concrete box, single story, maybe a little extra tall,
Right.
seems like super easy. But
Right.
I'm like, how do you even evaluate the demand or the competition or who would use that space?
Yeah, so that's the interesting question for people that are not in it, right? And this is the reason why you see, as we kind of were discussing prior to recording, was why you see so many of our counterparts on LinkedIn are multifamily focused, right? Because you can go in and you can see generally every apartment that's on the market on apartments.com and see the rents. And you can kind of see like how things are leasing more or less. Really with industrial, it's almost like information is almost gate kept still by brokerages. So you have to have the right background network to be able to make the phone call to the right broker in the market. So, and get the right comp sets, the right data sets, because people can steer you by giving you the wrong data sets, especially if you don't have them. So, really, in having numerous of those relationships in a market, again, let's say it's Portland, but basically, you would want to go in Portland and you would want to be like, okay, I need to talk to JLL's top industrial leasing broker. I need to talk to CBRE's top leasing broker and pick their brains on the market, try to understand what fits the market, drive the market around as well. Probably have one of them take you on a tour of the market to really get an understanding. And then you're kind of fact checking them while you talk to the other one right after. So that's how I would recommend starting. And that's why you don't see a bunch of people say, okay, I'm going to get into industrial syndication investments, because you have to almost have a background in it to understand it. Industrial, there's no like, I'm going to do a self-storage unit. I'm going to do a auto mechanic garage. Now I'm going to do a full-on distribution center. Or in the case with rail, what's typically served on rail served properties is manufacturing uses, because they're usually bringing in a commodity and converting it to whatever their product is, with rail. And I will tell you, rail is not as heavily utilized to a direct building service as it once was, and it's not as much of like a need. But you're
Interesting.
obviously also not going to build multifamily right along a rail in an industrial zone. So it still might serve an industrial use, but you're probably not even going to create a rail spur to serve the building, to be honest with you, because the cost is usually cost prohibitive. So most of those are usually refurbed buildings that have it currently.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I haven't done any studies. I was just, we had this conversation. I'm like, I guess I'll have to do some research, but most likely I would have to bring somebody in who already knows the market, knows the industry. I can manage the permitting and oversee the construction. That part's easy. But knowing who to target and who would be the final user of that, that's what I wouldn't know where
Right.
to start.
And what I would honestly, if you, and when we're done recording, I can take a look at who I've talked to in the market you're talking about back when I worked out west. I would be able to make some recommendations because both firms that I've worked with in industrial were nationwide. It would take me a 1 minute text like, hey, wait, who's the best in this market?
Right.
Direct. So, and that's
Cool.
what it takes. It's the old school real estate game of connection. It's not just find it on the internet type thing. No,
Right.
it's really sitting down and utilizing your network to expand to find the right person, because you don't know if you're getting the A team or the C team on the brokerage, and you might get totally different data from each one of them. And that might steer your whole investment, and you might have the C team and you might have the complete wrong information. So that's why I caution people is like, and the deal might still work out, right? That's the thing. It's like, it's underwriting's only, one snapshot of what can happen, right?
Right.
It's out of a million different ways that it's going to play out. And so you might underwrite something extremely bullish, and you might think it's conservative, right? Just based on who gave you the data set and who you spoke to. So you do have to have some of that knowledge in the industrial space. And so that's what I kind of really bring to the table when I'm talking about bringing these opportunities to more of the retail investor who doesn't typically see industrial deals. They see a ton of multifamily, but industrial they don't see as much because they don't have, most of the experts sit at principal firms or large funds, and that's who currently owns this stuff, right? It's not typically like you're not going to get if a broker is bringing a property to market, you're not going to get industrial syndicators in your offers, in your bid sheets. It's going to be your family offices. It's going to be your large private equity funds. It's going to be your large public REITs. And then you might have some owner occupants that operate their own businesses that want to buy as well.
Makes sense. So, how would you compare the risk profile of an industrial investment versus multifamily? That's more common.
Yeah, so the risk profile is probably it depends highly on the property. But I will tell you, generally speaking, because these are triple net deals with in-place contractual rent growth on the deals that I'm dealing with, your risk profile is a little bit lower, especially on the stabilized deals, because you're dealing with companies that the rent as a part of their operating budget is usually only between 6 to 8% of their operating budget for that specific site. So, like if you're talking about Amazon, it's only 6% of their budget, that rent and operating expenses. The rest of it usually is transportation and employees. So they care very little about how much they actually pay in rent, like in Amazon, because it's such a small amount. And if you increase the rent, let's say 10 cents in a month over a year, that won't even remotely hit their radar because of the way everything else is inflated so much faster.
Well, I was just thinking for a retail investor,
Yeah.
family office, if they are fairly agnostic about the type of investment, it sounds like it's a fairly good way to diversify their real estate portfolio from more typical multifamily deals and to put some of their investments in properties like this.
Yeah. So what I would say is like, as opposed to looking at like an individual's credit score and income for your rent, right? On a multifamily, you're looking at companies. So you got to evaluate companies' financial statements, balance sheet, income statements, cash flow statements, and make an understanding and a judgment call based on what that business is doing. Sometimes it's very easy in their investment credit, but a lot of times they're mom and pop local businesses, right? They might service, like for me, they might service the city of Columbus. For you, they might only service Seattle, right? Okay, they're not investment credit worthy. But someone like you or I will be like, well, that's a business that's been around for 40 years and they make $10 million. What do you mean they're not credit worthy, right? So for you and I, we might say, okay, this is a good lease. And leases in industrial are, call it 3 to 10 years, typical being 5. And rent increases are contractual and are usually about 3 to 4% across the country right now. So your rent's going up at 3% every year, as opposed to the multifamily where you may be able to push that rent up. You may not be. I just saw Washington's putting through votes on rent control. So that's interesting to think like, okay, the difference is in multifamily, you got to go out and get a new lease to get that rent up. You might sit on some vacancy to get that rent to the market. Whereas this one, this rent's in place for 5 years, and we're going to cash flow for 5 years. And that cash flow is going to grow at 3 to 4% for the next 5 years as well. That what that does for you on the exit, as well as you're exiting at a much higher market rent. So when you apply the exit cap, it also increases your value just by having that lease that grows.
Right. Well, am I wrong to think that sometimes having a super large tenant like an Amazon may not necessarily be a good thing? Yes, they have the balance sheet, but if they move out and default on their lease, going after them is probably harder than going after mom and pop that are locally owned.
Yeah, credit loss is an interesting game. Like Amazon, for example, like you're obviously very familiar sitting in Seattle, but they decided in 2022, right around the same time that the Fed raised rates. I mean, they had gobbled up millions and millions and millions of square feet across the country of this big bulk distribution. And then they decided one day that they're going to put them all up for sublease. Now, what I will tell you is they didn't default on almost any of those. They paid the bills. Some of them are still dark to this day. A lot of them have been sublet, or they ended up utilizing them. They just went too fast because of how quickly the market e-commerce sales shot up during COVID. So
Yeah.
from being in the high teens and went into like 40 to 50% was purchased online. So Amazon had to gobble up space in order to fit that, because they probably, I'm assuming based on the data they saw, they would know it would go back, but they probably just didn't know when COVID would end. But still, it's like, how can you make 5-year commitments on your lease on millions of square feet? I mean, Amazon leases over 400 million square feet of industrial space across the country. So it's, you would think they would make a little bit stronger of a judgment call. But yes, going after mom and pop for a non-paying rent, definitely much easier than fighting with Amazon. Amazon still pays the bills. Ironically, the U.S. government's one of the hardest ones to get to pay their bills, and yet they're the most credit-worthy tenant. Ironic, and
Right.
the GSA leases are some of the hardest negotiations, and you have to do the most work for. Like in industrial deals, they're triple net, as I'd mentioned, but like on a U.S. government, a GSA lease, that includes interior janitorial, which that's not common at all. That's usually 100% completely on the tenant. But like with them, you actually have to hire a janitor if you have a US GSA lease. So there's different complexities, and usually theirs are more of like a modified gross lease. Um, so that's a little bit unique as well.
And sir, what does GSA stand for?
Governmental, can't remember what the GSA stand for
Okay.
exactly. It's what every government lease is on.
Gotcha.
Yeah. GSA is the uh, General Services Administration.
Okay.
So that is who leases every government building when you do a government lease. So their offices and industrial properties is who you would see those through. So if you operate in multifamily, you wouldn't obviously run across them. The GSA, those are very unique, complex situations, and definitely unique. They're not always the standard like triple net deal. And what I'll tell you too is industrial historically, call it 10 years ago, you still were dealing with some gross leases. You were dealing with rent escalations tied to CPI. You were dealing with different types of stuff than you are today. It's kind of all rotated into that. Like the newer stuff is all triple net. It's all 3 to 4% bumps, as opposed to where it used to be, where rent didn't really grow all that fast either in industrial. Now, even today, with vacancy rates increasing due to all the bulk space on the market, you're still only talking about 93% occupied or 7% vacancy. And if you look at the majority of that's bulk space, large spaces that are sitting on the market that were overbuilt. Call it all started in 2020 or 2021.
Interesting. So, going back a little bit to your role and the investments that you're putting together, you said you're mostly investing on the sponsor side versus NLP side. Why that choice, and what's the advantage or disadvantage of being on the sponsor side?
Well, on the development side, I like to be able to, just because of my knowledge of operations and leasing, be able to have some say in that decision making. Because on the development side, that massively affects values. And I don't want me to commit my investors to a project that really my investors don't have a voice on what that sponsor does on the leasing. Because unlike multifamily, where you may be doing 300 leases, this is one lease that can drastically change the value of your building, or four leases that can drastically affect the value of your building. And they may not be motivated to get the maximum amount for whatever reason, right? So it's about alignment there. It's a little bit about control, as well as, to be honest with you, we're helping these sponsors whose main focus is building find more land sites. We both might be actively looking. I'm working with numerous different sponsors, so it's different in every conversation.
Can you think of the most shocking deal that you've ever made? What was something super unusual?
Well, I kind of mentioned my time at Link was super unique in that Blackstone was acquiring large companies, right? $8 billion, $10 billion, $18 billion real estate. So when we would acquire, we would tour a lot of these facilities. I would say the most shocking thing was going and seeing imitation crab meat. And it has nothing to do with real estate, but to smell warm fish that is painted red to look like crab and then is blast cooled in the middle of a warm, watery mess. It changes your view on eating like crab rangoon at your favorite Asian restaurant a little bit, you know. So I'll tell you that is certainly interesting. I'll tell you, as a newer firm, we have gone through the gambit of really, I mean, we've been a firm for 8 months. We've gone through the gambit of different things, and we had an agreed upon price, agreed upon, we raised the money, and then the seller backs out because they want to hold the asset till next year. They believe interest rates are going to continue to go down and cap rates will compress. Joke's on them now, obviously, at least in the short term. And then, we also have been up against the fact that we, as an industrial syndication versus multifamily, institutions, when they go to sell, are not used to seeing industrial syndication. So they don't have any belief in surety of close. So we've also battled that, where I've offered to go hard on LOI signing on the deposit, because try to get into the room so that they would believe we closed. Ironically, that one also, the buyer they selected has not closed. So it's kind of a laugh as well. And that should have closed several months ago. So, we've battled those things. And that's why we really are attacking, call it, partnering with the smaller sponsors that have some sort of value add or mark to market deals, as well as partnering with developers that are looking at land sites, because the landowner who was, you know, willed the land upon their parents passing, or the landowner that's a farmer that's done ready to retire or whatever, doesn't care that I'm not an institution. As opposed to most of these class A industrial and higher class B industrial, those sellers really do care about the ability to close within the time period agreed on.
Right. What do you see as the number one mistake real estate investors make?
I would say you have to do your due diligence, whether if you are an active real estate investor, meaning you are actively doing these projects, your property and on-site due diligence, your deal due diligence. And then if you are an LP investing in deals like me, is reviewing my track record, my history, potentially whoever my co-sponsor is and their track record and history of delivering on projects is paramount. And that's a mistake you can make. Finding somebody you trust, obviously developments can go sideways regardless of how experienced people are. So it may be no fault of their own, but it's definitely a mistake that people make, is they make too quick of decisions. Honestly, that's the way people do operate in life. That's a mistake people make. Slow down, take a breath, take a look at all the facts, and then make a slow decision. You may have to move quickly, but take your time.
Yeah, I feel like most times people make emotional decisions rather than an actual educated decision.
100%. We're emotional
Yep.
beings by nature, truthfully. If you slow down, you can pull a lot of emotion out.
Makes sense.
That's a great question. Probably trusting people. It kind of goes in the same light, but in both cases, what I was discussing, those both two deals that I discussed a little bit earlier, one where we had the agreed upon pricing and we raised the money and we were, about to go into contract. That's somebody I'd known for 10 plus years, worked with in the past, and really thought like, okay, we have this deal here. Knowing the typical real estate world, you can only trust so far that things are going to happen as you discussed in real estate. And then ironically, in the same token, I actually know the seller that didn't include us in the best and final, even though we're the highest bidder for the surety of close reason. I know those guys personally as well. And so really trusting that my network was going to come through was a little bit of a mistake. But honestly, I will tell you, those are some of the biggest learning experiences because it's pushed us to find the right way to build my firm. And more or less, it's pushed us to find new ways to operate, new ways to deal source, and new partners. Honestly, I'm working with people that I've only known for 6 months as opposed to people I've known for 10 years. In a lot of ways, they can be more genuine relationships than my old relationships. So, which is pretty exciting, honestly. The amount of people I've met in the last year is incredible. A lot of great people, in this game.
If you suddenly lost everything and you had to start over again, would you be able to do that? And if so, how?
I mean, I basically already did that, right? 8 months ago, we started that. Like we were starting from zero. We were starting from scratch. I will tell you, I would do it a little bit differently in that we would be farther along today just because I took those lumps with people that I knew just because I thought that that's where our deal flow would come from. But now I would tell you, I would have hit the phones harder to make new connections right off the jump. If you told me I had to start again today. And in a lot of ways, it feels like we're always starting right now because we're really building up deal flow right now. I feel like we're still in that starting block, to be honest with you.
So when you say deal flow, are you talking about the deals that you would invest in?
Both, actually, right? So from a couple standpoints, we have some trusted investors that will invest with us, but I've been working on building that, and I've met a ton of great people looking to diversify out of potentially investing in all multifamily, adding in some industrial, adding in some other asset classes within real estate as well. So that's been a great blessing and meeting a lot of really cool people that way, but also sponsors too for actual property and deal flow, project flow. We are working hard to make new connections every day with different sponsors that are looking to grow their platform. Really where our niche kind of feeds is there's the size of money we're raising for projects is call it $2 to $8 million. The sponsor that does 2 deals a year, that's a $2 to $8 million equity raise. They're usually doing that themselves. They don't care about growing. It's a country club raise, friends and family and referrals. Who we kind of are partnering with is the guy that says, yeah, I did 2 deals last year, but I want to go to 5. And then by that next year, I want to go to 10. And that outgrows that personal friends and family network. And so we're really working with younger guys that want to grow their firms as opposed to just kind of keep the status quo and just kind of raise from original traditional sources. So usually a little bit younger of firms. All of them have development track records. It's just more so that they want to expand how many projects they do as opposed to just kind of staying status quo.
If you were to give one advice to yourself 10 years ago, what would it be?
Don't ever quit because you'll find a way. Because honestly, 10 years ago, that's when I was getting started out of college, right? And so what I would say is like a lot of those times 10 years ago, you look back, like you probably remember when you were getting out of school and you don't know where like the first paycheck's going to come from, or how am I going to get to this level of income? How did that guy make that much money? Those questions roll through your head when you're exiting school. If you work hard, you'll find your way. And if you keep disciplined and you have kind of at least somewhat of a focus on what you want to do, you'll find your way.
Great advice. Gregg, is there anything else we should have been talking about that's really important?
I think we touched on pretty much everything.
If somebody wants to invest with you, where can we find you?
I mean, the easiest way is to look at my LinkedIn. Just look me up. My last name's pretty unique. And my first name also has 2 G's. So my parents really hit the nail on the head with making me very highly searchable. So if you search my name, Gregg, Gregg, Greel, Gruehl, you will instantly find me. I'm one of one.
Gregg, thank you very much.
Awesome.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for your time.